When you hear the word survival, what pops into your head? Probably something about animals in the wild, right? But survival is a much, much bigger story. It's a story that applies to the very words we speak and the ideas we hold dear. Today, we're going to look at how both of these things can be pulled back from the very brink of disappearing, all through a little bit of strategy and compromise.
Okay, so here's a question for you. It sounds like the start of a really weird joke, doesn't it? A dying language, a classic sci-fi show, and a Viking invasion. What on earth is the connection? Well, stick with me here, because by the end of this, you'll see exactly how these totally random threads weave together to tell one powerful story about adaptation, about compromise, and really about the art of just staying alive.
First up, we need to talk about the threat of, well, silence. See, every language is its own little universe, a totally unique way of seeing the world. But what happens when the last speaker goes quiet? That entire worldview, that whole universe of thought is just gone. Forever. And the scale of this problem, it's honestly staggering. Just think about this number for a second. In recent history, we estimate that over 2,000 languages have gone extinct. That's 2,000 unique ways of understanding humanity, history, and identity that have just vanished. And it's not slowing down. The UN thinks that more than half the languages we speak today could be gone within 100 years.
So why is this happening? Well, the reasons are usually pretty brutal and complicated. The big drivers are things like colonialism, where a dominant language just takes over, or cultural assimilation, where people are basically pressured to give up their native tongue. And sometimes it's just outright discrimination. It's hardly ever a case of a language just fading away naturally. It's almost always about power. To even begin to fight this, you have to know what you're up against. Experts use this scale from UNESCO to measure how healthy a language is. Think of it like a doctor's chart. It goes from safe, which means kids are learning it and everything's good, all the way down to extinct, where there's nobody left who remembers it. Those stages in the middle, like definitively endangered, are the huge red flags. Okay, but what if a language is already on life support, or maybe even considered extinct? Can you actually bring it back? Well, this is where linguists basically put on their detective hats, sifting through the echoes of the past to try and piece together what was lost.
And their number one tool for this detective work is something called the comparative method. It sounds super technical, but the idea is actually pretty cool. You look at a bunch of related languages, find the patterns in their words and grammar, and then you can kind of reverse engineer the common ancestor they all came from. It's how we build the family tree of languages and uncover a history that was never even written down.
All right, let's shift gears for a minute, because survival isn't just about digging up the past. It's about being smart enough to adapt to the present. And for a lesson in that, we're going to turn to a pretty unlikely place, the mind of Rod Serling, the genius who created the sci-fi classic, The Twilight Zone. So picture this. It's the 1950s. TV is still this shiny new thing. And you've got this writer, Rod Serling, who wants to tell stories about the real issues of the day. Racism, paranoia, greed. But there was a huge problem. The sponsors, the guys paying the bills, were terrified of anything controversial. So they would just gut his scripts, cutting out anything that had any real meaning. His ideas were, for all intents and purposes, being silenced.
So what did Serling do? He got clever. He found a loophole. He realized if he couldn't talk about these things directly, he'd just have to disguise them. So he created the Twilight Zone, this fantastic world of aliens and robots, and he basically let the Martians say all the things that a person in the 1950s couldn't get away with, smuggling these really powerful social critiques right into people's living rooms. And that, right there, that's the connection. What Rod Serling did to save his ideas is a perfect metaphor for what it takes to save a language. Both of them demand this clever, strategic adaptation to a world that might be hostile to you. It's not just about what you're trying to save, it's all about how you do it.
This brings us to a huge debate, a real tug-of-war in the world of language revitalization. On one side, you have the traditionalists. They say a language has to stay pure. No borrowing words, no changing the grammar. But on the other side, you've got people who say, no way, a language has to adapt to survive. Think about English. After the Norman invasion, it soaked up thousands of French words. It compromised, and it survived. Or modern Hebrew. They had to invent new words for things like electricity to stay relevant. So it raises this really tough question. Is it better for a language to die pure or to live on, even if it has to change?
Okay, so this all sounds great in theory. Adapt, compromise, be strategic. But how do you actually do it? How do you take a language that's barely hanging on and put it back into the daily lives of a community? Well, linguists have actually come up with some clear blueprints for this massive job.
One of the most famous roadmaps is from a linguist named Joshua Fishman. He created this 8-stage ladder to recovery. And the key is, you can't just jump to the top. You have to start at the bottom, building a solid foundation. You start with adults learning it. Then you create small communities where people can actually use it. After that, you work on getting it spoken in the home, passed from parents to children. Only then do you start aiming for schools and media and government. It's a slow, steady, strategic climb.
So, what makes that climb more likely to work? Another linguist, David Crystal, pointed out 6 key things you need. It's not enough for a language to just exist on paper. Its speakers have to see it as prestigious, as something to be proud of. They need some economic power to back it up. And, this is huge, it needs a strong presence in schools and has to be able to use modern tech, from apps to social media. At the end of the day, the language has to feel valuable and useful in the world, right now.
And just to give you a sense of how incredibly hard this is, let's talk about the ultimate challenge, bringing a language back from the dead. I mean, a language with 0 native speakers left. It has only been done successfully once. Just once in all of human history. The revival of Hebrew into the national language of Israel is the giant exception that proves the rule. It shows you that this is one of the toughest cultural projects anyone could ever take on.
So, let's bring all these different threads back together. When you boil it all down, whether you're talking about the words we speak or the ideas inside our heads, the fight for the future is always, in some way, a fight against silence.
Here's the big takeaway. Survival isn't a passive thing. It's not like putting an artifact in a museum and locking the door. It's an active, ongoing, and sometimes messy process. It takes the hard detective work of reconstruction, like the comparative method, but it also takes that clever, strategic adaptation of someone like Rod Serling, who knew that sometimes, to save an idea, you have to let it wear disguise.
Which leaves us with a final question, submitted for your approval. In our own world, which is changing faster than ever, where cultures and ideas are always under pressure, what are the things we're going to fight to save? And maybe the more important question is, are we willing to let those things change just a little so that they can survive for the generations to come?